think so.
Alright. You're like, what are you talking about? You didn't think you were part of the club?
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Alright guys, so
Cameraman's got his own cameo.
There was actually a book that launched this all. It was called The Uncommon Friends. Have any of you guys ever been to downtown Fort Myers? Okay, have you guys ever seen the group of statues? There's like 5 of them, and it's like Thomas Edison. He's kind of got his finger like this. It's along the river. And you guys, a lot of you have been to the Edison home, right? Okay. You haven't? You should. The holidays are going to light it up too. So, Jim Newton is the author of the Uncommon Friends book. He was about 21 years old when he moved in across the street from Thomas Edison off McGregor Boulevard. This is actually Edison Park. If you're looking at Edison home and you go like this and you turn to the other side of McGregor, this is the beginning of what we now know to be as Edison Park. Jim Newton was, I think he was the college dropout, I have to say. And his dad was a doctor up in Michigan, and they were just looking for things to do. He's a smart man, super tall, super charismatic. They came down to Southwest Florida and decided they were going to develop land. They had no idea Thomas Edison lived across the street. It was kind of hidden. No one really knew what that home was over there. There really weren't that many people here at the beginning of the 20th century, 1901, 1910 area. Jim Newton started developing what's known as Edison Park. Now this statue right here was what caused all the controversy. Initially, she was naked. She had no clothes on. It was just like this Roman goddess of a statue. Jim thought it would be a great idea to put it in front of the neighborhood to attract new homeowners. Mina Edison was looking out her window every single day and was just like, are you kidding me? She probably didn't talk like that, but she just said, this is not acceptable. The women of the Fort Myers Garden Club is not going to appreciate this statue. I'm not sure who that young man is over there, but I'm marching over there. I'm going to tell him the statue has to come down. So Mina Edison walks across the street, kind of snooping around, trying to figure out what's going on in there. Thomas Edison's probably in the laboratory somewhere. And she asks to see the manager of the property. Jim Newton says, "Man, that's me." She goes, "No, I mean, you know, your father or someone." He said, because he was 20 years old at the time. He said, "No, it's me. I've been given this land. I'm developing it." So they start getting into kind of a little bit of an argument. Mina eventually invites Jim over to have tea with her across the street at the Edison home. And that's when he met Thomas Edison. What happened was an incredible friendship from that point forward. Thomas Edison took Jim Newton under his wing and he mentored him. So Thomas Edison's like 60, 70 years old at the time. Just, you know, I mean, my gosh, you know, the greatest of all inventors. Just took to Jim Newton like you wouldn't believe and said, "I'm going to mentor you, son, and I'm going to show you what I know about life." And the statue remains today, but it is closed. So they kind of met in the middle there. Now it has a drape. So every time you go down McGregor Boulevard and you see the Edison home, look across the street and see that statue there. And that's how the Uncommon Friends all started. Jim Newton, through Thomas Edison, became friends with many, many more people. A lot of greats. You'll see Edison, Ford, and Firestone in the corner. There, this is Firestone. And then that's Jim Newton. And then these are some other friends of theirs. So Jim was just like this young, goofy guy, and somehow or another, he was just able to just like hang out with these guys, these greats. Edison became very good friends with Ford because of the automobile, obviously. And that was sort of their common thing that they wanted to make sure, like the assembly lines, so Thomas Edison was involved in that. And then Firestone was brought in because he was making tires at the time. So that was their friendship. And of course, here's Ford once again. So, and this is Edison with Ford and his wife, Jim Newton. So what happened with Jim is that he not only became great friends with Thomas Edison, but what really changed his life is his relationship with Harvey Firestone. Harvey Firestone was one of the first men to come up with the idea of franchises. Like one company that's all over the country, the Firestone Tire Store. So no one had really ever thought about that concept back then, but it was quite a concept. How do you take what's successful in one little city and duplicate it all over the country? How do you even do that? He brought Jim in to help him. So Jim learned a lot by being with these men. He was able to see how they operated, how they were so successful. Here's a letter from Firestone. He actually made Jim his CEO. The other uncommon friend, does anyone know who this is? Does that picture look familiar? Charles Lindbergh. Does everyone know who he is? Flew across the Atlantic. First one to fly across the Atlantic. That was another one of their friends. So, and this is Jim right here. And of course, this is a famous picture of Thomas Edison. And this is Jim and Ellie Newton, right before Jim died here at Fort Myers and his wife. So we go to the book. So Jim decided, I need to write a book on my experiences with these guys. They were all gone, they were dead, long gone. Jim is now, as you saw the most recent picture before he died, he was in his 90s. He decided to write a book called The Uncommon Friends. And in this book, which I'm going to leave a few for you today, you can also find it online, is his experiences with these greats of the century. Not just how they lived their lives professionally, how we know all of their inventions, but how they lived their lives personally. Back when you did business, believe it or not, with a handshake. Your word was everything at the turn of the century. Not like how it is today. Say one thing, you do another, your actions don't really follow what you mean. Integrity is sort of lost in many ways, has been for a while. It's not your generation's fault. It happened, I don't know, 100 years ago. But at this point in time, that stuff mattered. There's no way in hell you'd be successful if you went around people's back and you lied and you said things and you didn't follow. So this is what they call generational values. We're trying to bring them back. We believe that that matters. And this book is all about that. It's an interesting read. You learn about the history of Southwest Florida. You learn about these guys. You learn about how they did life, their marriage, the kind of fathers they were, and you learn about how they did business. Jim Newton is pretty 100% certain that Firestone would never have been as successful as he was if he didn't go into every store. He knew every employee's name. He asked about their family. If an employee was sick, he made sure they had the health care they needed. Little things like that. So that's what the book is. So from the foundation that was started in honor of Jim Newton, we decided one of the first things we wanted to do was have this business ethics course at FGCU. So you can blame us. That's why you're stuck in this class. But if you can really take something from this class, hopefully you are learning a little bit about decision making and how you would identify your own value statement, your personal value statement, which by the way is extremely important. I mean, I'm older than you guys. But I remember going through life, and you make decisions, and you can go either way with that decision, and you don't realize the path it's going to take you on if you make the wrong one. It's really tough to make decisions, choices, every single day coming at you. But if you can find that moral code, wherever that is inside of you, and these are things I'm not going to budge on, it can take you through life, and it will be so much smoother. But a lot of people don't know those. A lot of people weren't raised with those kinds of values. It's not always easy. But it can be taught. And you can take the experiences of people that have failed and fallen on their face, and then they come to you and say, hey, if I had a chance to do it over again, here's how I would do it. Before we go into Gary's presentation, I do want to leave you with the idea and the fact that mentors matter. Jim Newton, perfect example. He was taken under these guys' wings and changed his entire life. Find people in your life who can be mentors to you. That's what I did at a very young age. I was a TV reporter for a really long time, went to the University of Florida. I found people that could coach me and mentor me in whatever field I wanted. And that really, really helped. And they also taught me about decision making. And when I had some really serious decisions come at me and I knew that if I made the wrong one, my path could go this way or could go this way, they were there to help me make those decisions. So find people that align with your morals and values and watch them. The other thing I like to do is find people that have what I want in life. Find those people that have what you want. How'd you get that? Mind if I sit down and ask you how you got where you are right now? It's key. It's key. And usually people will be very willing to tell you how they got there. If you see people that are fun, but yet, you know, maybe seem like they're enjoying life, but they really don't have what you want in life, you want a totally different experience out of life than they had, you don't really need to be asking for their advice. Have fun with them. Ask for counsel from the people that have what you want out of life. That's the last thing I'm going to leave you. And then, Gary, do you want to get set up? He's got an awesome video he's going to show you too. Do you guys have any questions about the Uncommon Friends? He called them as Uncommon Friends because he thought they were just that. Pretty darn uncommon. Thoughts?
I'm just kind of curious, how did that conversation about the naked, statue go about? I mean, how did these friends and wife absolutely, that piece of art?
I guess from what they say about Jim Newton, he was charismatic. He was just one of those, people like that. You may even be one of them. Just gets what he wants. Somehow or another, I mean, that really is the legend. Somehow or another, this guy was able to talk Mina Edison into getting what he wants. I mean, it's just, and then Thomas Edison was drawn to him. Just one of those guys. And he was all the way through all this, like, most of you aren't from Fort Myers. I am. Jim Newton is a legend in Fort Myers. Not just because of his friendships, but what he ended up doing. It was pretty cool. No, he died in 2000. He died in 2000. He never had kids. He got married, but they never had children. Try not to run into the trash can on your way out. So they had a lot of archives. He had a lot of Bibles that Thomas Edison had left behind. Did all these amazing things from his experiences, and they were going to go to another university. They were actually going to go to Princeton in New Jersey. And that's when our community came together and said, you know what, this is part of our history. We don't want to lose this. And that's what started the foundation. So there's a lot of people alive that knew Jim that are on this board of directors, and that's why he started it. It was in his honor. Google him. Be interesting. So, Gary?
Angela, thank you.
Yes.
I think we are good to go. There will be more of Angela in the presentation I'm about to share with you. So let me give you a little bit of backup on the concept. Let me eliminate. Just go to full screen.
Two over. That's one more. That one.
Here we go. Okay. Better. So let me tell you a little bit of a story about me and how I ended up meeting Angela and including Angela in the CEO of the Future. So my background is somewhat similar to Angela. Obviously, I'm a few years older, but I also worked in television. I worked for Wink TV here for 17 years. Part of that I was general sales manager, and part of that I was general manager. While I was at Wink TV in my earlier years, I met a gentleman named Ken Steeden that helped me put together the CEO of the Future that you're about to see. And Ken was available. I have him here because he's a great presenter. Ken works with Angela and the Uncommon Friends Foundation. But I reached out to Angela on my own because what I wanted to include in this presentation, the CEO of the Future, I wanted to include young leaders. And I also wanted to include not just any young leaders, I wanted to include young leaders that were female, like Angela, and also had a purpose in their life. And so I felt that Angela, among a few others, that would fit where you would like to learn about what does the CEO of the future look like, right? We know the CEO of the past. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about Henry Ford. And we're going to talk about many other CEOs of the past. We're going to talk about CEOs of the future. But what I want to do is make this engaging and relevant to people your age. Okay? The other thing I want to do in this presentation is make it interactive. So I'm going to be counting on all of you, and I do mean all of you, to share with everybody your thoughts as we go through it. So why the CEO of the future? Why is this important? Well, we all know who Larry Page is, and we all know what Google does for us, right? We couldn't live without it. Larry Page says it, I think, as well as anybody. Lots of companies don't succeed over time. What do they fundamentally do wrong? They usually miss the future. That's why we felt this was a very important subject to work on. So here's my first question of you. Name some companies that miss the future.
Enron.
Excuse me?
Enron.
Okay. Okay.
Blockbuster.
Okay, that comes up with, that's a good one. Okay. Any other companies, even industries that you think may have this the future? Basically, you are the future, right? So it would be companies that didn't get what you're all about. I'll share with you, because Angela and I both come from broadcasting, a lot of traditional older media companies miss the future. Print media, when I first got here in 1990, I was working at Win TV, the Fort Myers News Press basically owned the market in terms of advertising. In other words, what I mean by that, they build more than any other print or broadcast property in the marketplace. We couldn't touch them. Okay, so now that was 1990. Here we are many years later, and that newspaper, which is owned by Gannett, is now struggling to stay relevant to readers of all ages, but especially you, especially people your age. I remember when I was at Win TV as GM, and they asked me to speak to a group of students younger than you in school, in high school, and I asked them, okay, what do you all watch on TV? And this was probably, let's say, this is about early 2000. And they were struggling to come up with programs that they were watching. The programs that they were watching were not on Win TV, and they were typically on a cable channel, and it was obviously a program that would be of interest to you that you probably don't watch anymore, right? But what I started realizing from meeting with these young students, potentially future media users, like, wow, they're totally disconnected with media. So I would just share with you, traditional media, newspapers, broadcasters, even radio, are really struggling to stay relevant to people your age. So that's why it's important that we don't miss the future. But before we go forward studying the future, let's think about the importance of studying a little bit of history. So business leaders ought to study history. You can't possibly know where you are or where you're going if you don't know where you've been. And Angela obviously has done a great job setting this up. So now if we go back to when the Uncommon Friends were developing their friendships and building not only businesses but industries in the early 1900s, the term Chief Executive Officer, CEO, Chief Executive Officer, first appeared in print. If you go back to 1917, by the way, radio didn't even exist. So obviously there was no TV, there was no radio of any kind. So all you had basically was print. So people doing research on the term Chief Executive Officer first found it originating almost 100 years ago. And by the way, before we leave this slide, this is important because I want to refer to it later. Here's, let's say, a business meeting, maybe a board meeting of some kind back in the early 1900s. All right. Most people, even my age, don't dress that formally anymore. You can see that people were smoking cigars and pipes, etc. You don't see that very often anymore, certainly not in a business meeting. But the other point I want to make to you is not just how formal it is and how the culture was different back then, but there were no women. There were no women in the room, okay? That was, as you know, ladies, that was their loss. That none of you or the generations before you were there to share your thoughts. So we are going to talk a little bit about Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and Harvey Firestone. Angela referred to them as the Uncommon Friends. It was an amazing time. These gentlemen and others were literally not only starting companies, were starting industries, changing the world that we live in now and take for granted, like driving a car. It was people like Henry Ford that made that a reality. Now, what can we learn from these visionary leaders? We can learn a lot. Angela shared some thoughts with you earlier. What we did, we being Ken Sneeden and I, we spent about an hour interviewing Angela. We wanted to know all of her thoughts on not just the Uncommon Friends that you see up there, but her thoughts about leadership from her perspective, being a a woman also being, she was, when I first found Angela, she was in a magazine, I think it was Gulf Shore Business, and she was featured as one of the 40 under 40. So one of the leaders that they wanted to highlight in the area because of who she is and what she's done in an early part of her life. So in interviewing Angela, we wanted to ask her, what would you ask these guys if they were alive today? Here's her response.
I'd love to hear some of their stories on where they really felt they were at a crossroads and made a decision, a tough decision, and what went into making a decision. I find that even as a leader today, that decisions are tough and they never really get easier. I mean, and that's why people say you have a core sense of beliefs and purpose, and as long as you don't waver from that, you'll make the right decision.
Great advice from Angela. Okay, has everybody heard of the term case study?
Yes.
Okay, we're not going to do a case study. I'm not going to drag you through that. However, if this was the end of the case study, and that's basically what it is. Henry Ford gives $10 million in 1914 profits to his employees, doubles pay of $25,000 in his company. This is the end result of a very, very difficult decision that Henry Ford and his leadership team had to make about challenges that they were experiencing in their new business. They were relatively successful in the early 1900s, but they were starting to hit some serious challenges. And I will give you one hint. The challenges were in the area of personnel, of people. So what do you think motivated Henry Ford to potentially, and use the term give, they obviously, the people that he gave it to had to qualify for it, and we'll get into that in a minute, but what do you think was going on back in the early 1900s?
Lack of safety laws, lack of ethical decisions that promote the safety of their personnel, most likely, and the well-being of their families. I mean, as it says right there, nationwide strike being discussed by labor leaders. Back in those days, personnel weren't really, they were more saw as assets instead of individuals. And so they were not taken care of as human beings, more as a potential profit, something that can help create revenue.
We're on to something. That is getting us and going in the right direction. It is about the fact that Henry Ford helped to refine the assembly line, right? What happened was when Henry Ford decided to start his business, the way autos were being manufactured by literally hundreds of small companies was by artisans. So it took a long time to produce an automobile, and they were very, very expensive, all right? And they weren't very, very reliable, and most people couldn't afford them. Henry Ford's business model disrupted all that. He was a disruptor in that day. And what he did is, let's create an assembly line. Let's figure out a way to mass produce automobiles, right? And we're going to bring in literally thousands and thousands of workers to help to do this. We're going to be much more productive via this assembly line. And that'll help maintain and drive down the cost of the automobile, which made it more affordable. The problem, though, getting back to your point, the problem with that is if we ask any one of you to do the same motion, the same task, 9 hours a day back then, right? 6 days a week. Back then, they were getting paid less than $3 a day, okay, on the assembly line. What would happen? Okay, let's just say the pay was more comparable with today, but the task is just the same task, 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. What's going to happen? You're going to get bored. You're going to get bored. You're going to decide, you know what? I mean, making $3 was actually less than that. Let's say it's $3 a day. That's okay. I see the future maybe in a Ford Motor Company. However, I just can't do this for the rest of my life or for the next 5, 10, 20 years. So what happened was he had an incredible amount of turnover that was really, really hurting the operation. So if you had somebody in the assembly line that didn't show up, it impacted the entire assembly line. So what he had to do, and what he decided with his leadership team is, what do you think we'd have to pay to get, one, better employees to be willing to do these tasks over and over again, instead of 9 hours a day, to shorten the work week, the work day to 8 hours a day, but to do that over and over again. So basically, the lesson here is that money does work to a point, right? If you pay people enough money, they're willing to put up, let's say, with boredom and tediousness. However, as managers, as future managers and leaders, there's something for you to think about. When you're in management positions and you're running a team or a staff or a company, you got to think about the meaning that the work has to the worker. And if you don't have enough meaning,